Hi everybody, Colin Stevenson here, joined by my hero, John Lenhart. Hi John.
Hi.
Today we're talking about flow and how flow within leadership and how important it is. And obviously we're taking people through the steps of flow, through these videos and different stages. So if you can start us off, please, John, in explaining the importance of flow within leadership, please.
Right. So when I deal with a leader, the first question I like to ask them is what is in your head coming out when you look at your group?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of places this can be. For an athletic team, I'll say to a coach, is what is in your head coming out during the game? If I'm dealing with a person who's in charge of a company, corporation, I'll say, is what is in your head coming out in your employees when you're not around? And my point is always there's two stages between what is in your head and it actually coming out. And I like to call them various things for various, contexts, but practice and the game when it comes to athletics. There's practice, is what is in your head coming out during practice, and then is that coming out during the game? Because that's different. If you think about in the arts, like a director of a play,
Yeah.
is what is coming out in your head coming out in rehearsal, and then is it coming out during the performance? Is for the corporate person, is what is coming out in your head, is what is in your head coming out in the employees when you're standing there?
Yeah.
Because when you're standing there, employees act one way. When you're gone, they act a different way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when you think about education, there's the kids are learning, being taught, and then there's the test. When you think about interpersonal relationships, there's dating and there's marriage. So what these two stages all have in common is the first stage is very conscious brain. We call it 80. Practice, rehearsal, dating. These are all things you do and you're rehearsed at it.
Yeah.
And then the second step is where you flow. Now that you've learned it, have you learned how to do this? And the issue is the first step is always very controlled and effort based. And the second step ought to be no control and no effort. It ought to just come out. And that's where a lot of people fall apart. And this is really important. If you think about it, when you have a big speech to give, or you're going to ask somebody out, or you've got to go to your boss and ask for a raise, or you got to go to court, there's these moments in life where you've got to perform. You have this narrow window and you've got to perform. And if you don't perform and you don't do it well, there are people who spend decades of their life talking about that one moment they had that went away. And that is flow. That's why flow is so important. So what I do is I help leaders help whatever their organization is go through these two steps towards flow.
Yep. When you're talking about that, I found it on my driving test. And that was how I failed my driving test first time. So I was 18 and I took my driving test. And when I was out driving, it's flow. You don't think. You've done the rehearsals, you've done the practice, and it was great. It was fantastic. The minute that test woman sat beside me, my body was totally tense. I was in that conscious place where if I think I'm going to do this wrong, I am. And I did. Because again, and I say this to people, if you try not to think about something, you're 3 times more than likely to think about it. So you're not in flow, and that's where you make mistakes. Playing football, playing golf, if you think about hitting that ball or scoring that goal, you're going to lose. you're not in flow. You're going to have to snap out and try and get back into it again. And it's very, very difficult.
Right. So the issue becomes the transition between the two. So what happens is, if you think about it, it's like you practice one way and you play the game the other way. And I see this. So here's the point. I'm going to make the point. I'm going to give another great example is what I like to say to people is there's 2 ways to make the transition. The first way is when you practice, pretend like it's the game.
Yep.
in America, in American football, there's a team, the Seattle Seahawks, a pro football team. Every game, even their preseason scrimmage games, they treat it like the Super Bowl, like the championship. They treat every game like that. So that when they got to the Super Bowl, it was like every game to them, and they ended up destroying the other team, wiping the other team out in the Super Bowl because they played that game and they were so used to it. Versus the other team got to Super Bowl and went, now we really want to win. The other way is there's a movie called Hoosiers. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie.
No, I've never seen it.
So it's an American movie. It's about this basketball team from a very small place, Hickory High in Indiana, and they went to the championship in their state against a very large school. And there's this epic scene where the day before the big game, they're walking around this arena. So Hickory High is this, like, there's no room. There's only room for a basketball court, and that's it. Like that's their court they're playing on. And they make it to the championship, and they're in this arena. And there's this scene where the coach is, Gene Hackman plays the coach. They got all these players, and they're standing on the floor, and they're looking around the arena. And just like you said, now how many thoughts do they have? They have a lot more than one thought. And they're just looking around going, how are we going to play in here? And he brought a tape measure, the coach did. And he hands a tape measure to one of the players, and he says, measure, get up on his shoulders and measure the rim. So they measure the rim. He goes, how high is it? The guy goes, 10 feet. He goes, measure the free throw line. How far is it? He goes, 15 feet. He goes, gentlemen, I think if you measured the dimensions of this court, you'd find they're exactly the same as our court in Hickory High. So his point was, play the championship game like it's practice.
Yep.
So you have two ways of making this transition. You either practice like it's the game, or you play the game like it's practice. A couple of years ago, like 5 years ago in America, in the NCAA tournament, there were these two coaches that were in this game to get into the Final Four. And they were very, very big time coaches. And I was working with a football coach, American football coach, telling him about what I just told you. He was watching the game. They interviewed both coaches, and they said, how are you going to approach this important game? And the one coach said, we've had important games all season long. This is just another game. So he said this is just another game. The other coach says, we treat all our games like they're important. And so he said the other way, and this football coach wrote me and said, what you just said, both of the coaches had the two approaches, and that's it. So what I like to say to people who run a corporation, I like to ask them, when is your employee trained at a new job responsibility? When do you consider them trained?
Yeah.
And what they normally say is when they're able to do the job without help. And that's what I like to say, consciously. Because if you think about it, if you have an employee who's in flow at work, and then all of a sudden you train them to another aspect of their job, and when they're able to do it with no help, they're able to do it consciously, which is like practice, which means they're not flowing.
Yep.
A lot of what I do for corporations is I help their training become instantly effective, because this person, even though you think they're trained, you took them out of flow. Do you know how to train this person so that they go back to flow? Do you know how to train them to the point that they can do it without thinking? And that's how I help companies. A lot of companies bring trainers in, and everything goes bad for a while because what you had was an organization of flow. And with the training, you took everybody out of flow. All you did was hire a trainer who was good at practice, but wasn't good at the game.
I found that as well when it comes to, so I've worked in corporate businesses and sales and things like that. And you find when a trainer comes in, they just give you the indoctrination. They don't get you to practice enough until you get to that point of flow. And I find this is very, very difficult. So I was naturally a good salesperson because I vibe people, I feel them, and I gave them what they wanted. I didn't force a sale onto somebody or try and get them into the car that's been sitting in the showroom for 3 months. That wasn't me. And they didn't like it. And they didn't like that I used to be able to do it naturally. But when they say, okay, you're going on a training course, and we need you to now say this script, and we need you to say these words, and we need you to do this. What actually happened was I struggled with my natural ability, and then what I was told to do that wasn't me. And I find this happens in a lot of workplaces as well. When it comes to leadership, you can't put a blanket over everybody. And we've discussed this, and that's why the intangible drivers are so imperative to know within an organization. But also, when you try and put a blanket over somebody, they feel stifled, and they can't express themselves either. So what you're saying is totally spot on, and it's where we need to take these people and get them into their own stride, their own method of working within the same parameters of the business values.
Right. And that's where people say there's not one size that fits all. So if I say I can get anybody in flow, they go, well, there's not one size that fits all. But they don't understand what you just said were these backward steps of the uniqueness. I teach people the truth about flow, but how they express it and how they do it ought to be according to their uniqueness, which is why the first step of flow and is the flow process, your unique process for flow, is understanding your uniqueness.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right, Colin. The point there is with training, it's important to get the truth into the employee, but how they express it, we got to learn to step back and let that happen, which is that conjunctive, which we've talked a lot about. So these things can happen. And what they did to you was they took you out of flow. Yeah. And then even if you did what they said, it wouldn't be genuine. And we're human, so we don't vibe that humanness or make that connection. And then you're not going to be a very good salesman if you can't form a connection. And we all know the following.
Yep.
Whenever you go in an organization and you look at the most successful person, if you can get them to honestly tell you what they do, they will tell you, I don't follow the script.
Of course not. Of course not. And that was me. I was able to do 16 to 24 cars a month from people walking through my door. I didn't even have to phone them, and I didn't have to get an appointment, and I wasn't allowed sales calls because I was a new guy. So there you go. If I had the sales calls, people just wanting the product, I'd have been top salesman. Do you know? And it's that way, but they wouldn't want somebody coming in at that level to be able to do it. So it was slightly difficult. So that takes me on to the next point. A lot of leaders don't want the newbies to do very well in case it puts other people's noses out of joint. Now, this is also a problem because what they're doing is they're stifling their natural ability to either go up to leadership status themselves or to allow them to challenge the top, the top, and then that allows them to up their game.
So you've tapped into a special moment where I'm going to teach an executive coaching point that I usually keep for people that I personally coach. The advice I give people when they start a job is to do the company's process perfectly, which again is the practice step. So what I'll tell them is whatever they're telling you to do it perfectly. And what I'm really telling them to do is do the practice step and do it to a point you don't have to think about it. Do it perfectly. Let them see you do it and get them to confirm that you've done it. Because an organization won't listen to a new person's idea until they know that person has embraced their idea first. It's the same thing we see with people. Now I'm saying there's an organization and a person. It's the same thing as if it's two people. Unless I know I'm understood, I'm not listening to you.
Building that trust.
Right, building a trust. So what happens is I tell them, once you do that and you show them you can do it perfectly, the organization's guard comes down, and then you can try that a different way. And it's the same thing, like what you're saying is these people who, that's why a lot of these really successful salespeople don't want anybody coming with them. It wrecks their flow. They could be superstitious, or they have some secrets and they're not following the scripted format, and that's how they're making all the sales. I love helping leaders of organizations understand this, putting words to this, so that all their salespeople, the leaders of organizations don't want one good salesperson. They want a bunch of good salespeople. And there's a way to help all your salespeople be good with their uniqueness in your company. And that's something we're building to. So I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but where we're going to go with systems and with purpose is your purpose is your uniqueness plus the mission of the greater system.
Yeah.
That's what I do for companies. If you can understand the uniqueness of employee and match it with the mission of your organization, these people will feel engaged and keep going. So rather than go down that road, I just want to cover a couple things before the end of this. And that is, what are the enemies of flow? And what is a leader supposed to do? So if you remember the 6 steps of flow, the first step is for us to be focused in the moment, intense focus, concentration, one thought. So one of the enemies of the flow is choking. This is when we have too many thoughts. We could call this 160. So they're not at one thought, they have more than one thought. That's called choking or too many thoughts. The other issue with flow is panicking. This is when you're freaking out. You don't have any thoughts. You're just going crazy. It's really important to understand if your employees or your organization is choking or panicking, because there's a specific approach to each. If someone is panicking, or if your organization is panicking, what you want to do is distract them with emotion.
Yep.
You don't want to give them another thought because they already have too many thoughts. The goal is to get them back down to one thought. And the way you do it is distract them, and you use emotion. So you could yell at them. This is the only time a leader, especially an athletic coach, ought to yell at an employee or a player.
Yep.
And it's if they're in the game, and this is why you'll see coaches yell during a game. If they're playing the game and they start getting too many thoughts and they get tight, the coach can pull them aside and yell at them with emotion, and it gets the player to one thought. Then the coach should stop yelling at them. The problem is a lot of people watch that, and then at practice, they yell. There is never, ever, ever, ever a good reason for a coach to yell at somebody during practice. There's never a good reason for a teacher to yell at a student in their classroom teaching. You can yell or show emotion when they're taking the test.
Yeah.
And it might actually help the student. You can yell or show emotion during the game, and it can help the player if the player is choking. If the player is panicking, it will cause them to injure themselves or injure another person.
Yeah.
So if you're yelling and showing emotion at a person panicking, which people go to bars, someone gets to panic, someone yells and shows emotion, and someone ends up dead.
Yeah.
So that's why you don't want to treat a panicking person like they're choking. How do you treat a panicking person? You're very calm, and you only talk about one thing at a time. A lot of times when someone's panicking, I'll let them, do whatever, and then I will start talking to them like this. And what I'm trying to do is waste 60 seconds so their body absorbs the adrenaline.
Yeah.
So you only want to give them one thing at a time, and you want to be calm with no emotion, and they'll kind of through a fog focus in on you, and their body's absorbing the adrenaline. So notice, if you talk to a choking person very calmly, you're adding thoughts, and they're going to end up panicking and probably hurting you. So it's really crucial when you look at an organization. The organization's panicking, calm, no emotion. If the organization is choking, throwing the bats or throwing the water cooler and kicking, when you see these coaches, they go, that worked. Then they think, oh, I should always yell and scream. Not if they're panicking. Then all of a sudden there's a fight. Now, all of a sudden the benches have emptied and everybody's fighting. Why? Because you treated a bunch of panicking people like they're choking, and you caused that. So those are the first 2 enemies of flow, or things to handle.
It makes sense because I always do the calm thing, and I've never thought about shouting. So that'll be why when you talk calmly, it doesn't work. And that makes a lot of sense because I always do the calm thing and it's like, cool, don't worry, let's talk about this. So I've actually learned a lot today, and that makes it's just things have just started clicking for me again. So I hope other people obviously can see the benefit for that as well.
Yeah, it's important with the teachers in the classroom. It's important with the coaches. There is a way to talk that you're helping an employee. And what happens is people are 50-50, but if you know how to measure that, you're there. The final thing I want to talk about is when people drift, or especially organizations, when they drift out of flow, there's two reasons why they're going to drift out of flow. They're either bored or they're overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So when you look at an organization, if your organization is bored, that's when you want to pose a challenge.
Yeah.
So if your organization's bored, that's when you suddenly go, hey, everybody, this month we're going to try to break this record and there's a $50 bonus, blah, 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 blah. That worked. It got people in flow. Versus if people are overwhelmed, if they've got too many thoughts, a challenge doesn't help them. It actually adds a thought. If people are overwhelmed, what you want to do is they want to build a skill.
Yep.
You want to take and say, look at what's a skill that would help you be able to handle that. Why don't we just focus on building a skill? So what I'll tell people is you can apply this down to the person right now. Are you focused on building a skill, or are you focused on a challenge? Yep. Because if you're not doing one of those two, you're not going to be in flow. Your organization, the organization you're in, are they focused on a challenge? Or focused on building skill? And so the last story I'll tell you is this, and I saw this happen, is there was this football team in the United States, the New Orleans Saints, and they had this is 2 years ago, they had the best record. They were doing great. Everything was going fine. And I would say they were in flow. And what happened was their coach brought in, I think it was one of the trophies they had won, and then put all this money that they would get if they win it in the locker room for all to look at. And I had a bunch of people calling me up and going, what did you think of that? And I'm like, bet against them. This team was in flow. Things were going fine. And what happened was he added another thought. Now the team was doing their thing. They were treating every game the same. And what he did was say, look at this. And what he did was I said he caused the team to choke.
Yeah.
And the team ended up choking and not making it. The reason the coach did that was he had a mentor who was a coach, Bill Parcells of the Giants, who had done that same thing. However, when he did it, he had a bunch of maniacs on his team. Okay. One of the most amazing defenses, some of the most amazing players. And they were a distraction to each other. They were a constant yelling, screaming. They were all over the place. So what did he do? He put the trophy and a bunch of money in the center of the locker room, and all of them went, put them in flow, won the Super Bowl. So
yeah,
that's the part everybody's missing is your team choking or panicking? Do you know what to do? Are they under a challenge, or are they building a skill? And if you try to do both as a main focus, you're going to take them out of flow. This would help any athletic coach in any sport. This would help any leader in any organization be able to do this. And the very last thing I will tell you is this actually applies to people dating. There's a lot of people, everything's great when they're dating because, like you with your driving, they're flowing and they don't have to be a really good driver at this moment. They don't have to be about that other person in this moment. And then when they get married, they have to be about this person. And they don't know how to do it. And all of a sudden they start choking into marriage.
Yeah.
And what I end up telling people is is if you're flowing into dating, you got to figure out, do you either pretend like you're married to the person now so that there's not that transition, or when you get married, just pretend you're still dating them.
Yeah.
But that's where, I mean, this application applies to every area of everybody's life. Is there are two areas that you work in. You work in a practice area and you work in a performance area. Do you know how to transition between them? And do you know how to help yourself and other people when they get out of flow in those areas?
Just before we go, I'd like to say this video will help people in first aid. This video will help people in first aid a lot, because you can panic or you can choke in first aid. And if you're not able to then apply what you've learned, that means you're not in flow, you've not done it enough times. So while you're doing it, again, using this practice, now it's a lot for me to think about. I'm going to go and have to process this. So thank you so much. And I look forward to speaking to you next week. Take care, John.
Bye.